December 7th, 1941. The day history says Pearl Harbor was attacked. But imagine if it wasn't. No explosions, no sirens, no chaos, just calm waters and sailors going about their morning. What would the world look like if Japan had never attacked? Stay tuned and hit like, comment, and subscribe to WW2 Untold Stories to uncover history that never happened. December 7th, 1941. A silent Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941. The sun rises over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, casting a golden glow across the calm waters. The gentle rocking of the moored battleships and cruisers is almost hypnotic as sailors move about their morning routines, unaware of the storm that history almost sent their way. But in this alternate timeline, the roar of Japanese aircraft never shatters the quiet. The planes remain on the carriers. The meticulously planned attack never launched. You can almost hear the ordinary chatter of sailors, coffee cups clinking, ropes scraping against hulls, officers calling out orders for morning drills. On the USS Arizona, crew members polish brass and check the decks, oblivious to the fact that their fate has diverged from the one recorded in history books. Meanwhile, on the bridge of the USS Nevada, Lieutenant Commander James Watson glances over the harbor, feeling the calm tension of another peaceful morning. Across the Pacific, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sits in the briefing room aboard the carrier Akagi, staring at maps that mark the Pacific Fleet. The decision has been made. The strike will not happen. Political pressures, logistical hesitations, and concerns over American retaliation have kept the fleet anchored in restraint. Yamamoto leans back in his chair, the weight of the war on his shoulders, knowing that postponing this strike could reshape the entire course of the conflict. Back in Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt awakens to a routine December day. He sips his coffee and reviews reports from the Pacific Fleet. There are no urgent telegrams, no catastrophic news alerts. The American public continues its daily life, blissfully unaware that the war in the Pacific has not yet ignited. The tension is muted but present, a simmering undercurrent as international forces continue their quiet maneuvers across Asia and Europe. The absence of the attack leaves a vacuum of uncertainty. Japan continues its campaigns in China and Southeast Asia, but without provoking the United States into direct action. Intelligence officers on both sides sense that history is teetering on a knife's edge, knowing that the next months could either escalate into global warfare or delay the inevitable for years. Ships glide through the harbor, planes taxi on the runways, and the world waits, holding its breath in this fragile peace.
The strategic pause, Japan's calculated restraint. As the morning drifts into afternoon, the Japanese fleet quietly returns to its positions far from Hawaii, the carriers hidden beneath cloud cover in the western Pacific. Admiral Yamamoto convenes a private council with his senior officers. The mood aboard the flagship is tense but controlled. There is no eruption of action, only careful calculation. The strike on Pearl Harbor, once considered inevitable, is shelved indefinitely. Yamamoto weighs the potential gains of a surprise attack against the catastrophic risks of awakening the full might of the United States too early. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters issues revised orders. Japanese forces in the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies continue their campaigns, but with a different urgency. Without the provocation of Pearl Harbor, American forces remain on alert but restrained, sending only diplomatic warnings and intelligence updates. Japanese leaders believe that by delaying the confrontation, they might consolidate their positions and secure resources without immediately engaging the industrial and military powerhouse across the Pacific. Meanwhile, American intelligence analysts grow suspicious of the Japanese fleet's movements. Radar reports and intercepted communications hint at Japanese activity in Southeast Asia, but nothing points directly to an imminent strike on the homeland.
President Roosevelt convenes a meeting with his naval advisors aboard the USS Potomac. The room hums with tension as strategies are debated, but with no attack, there is no national emergency. Roosevelt's advisors emphasize preparedness while avoiding provocative measures that could escalate the situation prematurely. Across the Pacific, ordinary sailors continue their routines, unaware of how the absence of this attack is reshaping history. The U.S. Pacific Fleet maintains a heightened state of readiness, running drills and simulations, but there is no chaos, no fiery destruction, no sudden loss of life. The calm is deceptive. In both Tokyo and Washington, every decision, every telegram, every naval maneuver now carries the weight of potential global consequences that might never have been realized, yet.
Europe watches the Pacific unfold. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in Berlin, Adolf Hitler and his generals monitor the Pacific with keen interest. The absence of an American entry into the war reshapes German calculations entirely. With the United States not yet provoked, Hitler's war planners see a prolonged window to consolidate gains in Europe and Africa. Discussions in the Reich Chancellery are charged with a mixture of relief and ambition. Relief that the Western Hemisphere remains largely untouched, and ambition to expand influence in the East without American interference. In London, Winston Churchill studies the same intelligence reports with mounting concern. Without the U.S. joining the fight, Britain's war effort faces a graver challenge. Supplies and troops can still flow from the Commonwealth, but the absence of immediate American intervention means that Britain must rely more heavily on its existing resources and strategic ingenuity. Churchill walks the corridors of Whitehall, maps spread across tables, weighing options for both defense and potential counterattacks. Every move is calculated, every alliance reconsidered. Back in Washington, debates over military aid intensify. The Lend-Lease program accelerates, funneling equipment, aircraft, and supplies to allies across Europe and Asia. Roosevelt's administration faces a delicate balancing act: support the Allies sufficiently to check Axis expansion while avoiding any action that could force the United States into direct war prematurely. Lobbyists, generals, and diplomats clash over the pace and scope of aid, the stakes heightened by the knowledge that the world's most industrialized power is still technically neutral. In the Far East, Japanese commanders grow increasingly confident. Naval officers aboard the carriers discuss alternative strategies: further expansion into resource-rich regions, securing oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, and fortifying positions in the Pacific. Yet even amid this confidence, caution dominates every decision. The world teeters on a knife's edge, every empire testing its limits, while the shadow of potential conflict stretches across continents. The absence of Pearl Harbor creates a tense, almost surreal calm, a lull in the storm that might have otherwise engulfed the globe.
The United States prepares, without shock. Without the devastation of Pearl Harbor, the United States embarks on a slower, more deliberate path toward full mobilization. Shipyards hum with activity as aircraft carriers and battleships are constructed at a steady pace. But there is no frantic urgency, no nationwide panic drills. Soldiers train rigorously on the coasts, conducting maneuvers and exercises. Yet the American public largely continues its everyday life, unaware of how the delay in hostilities could alter history. In naval bases across the Pacific, officers hold war games designed to simulate potential Japanese strikes, constantly refining strategies for defending the islands and key sea lanes. Radar stations monitor the horizon meticulously, and submarine patrols cover the vast stretches of ocean. But without the trigger of an actual attack, operational decisions remain methodical rather than reactive. The absence of destruction allows lessons to be learned without immediate loss, giving the U.S. military a rare luxury of preparation time that would not exist in our historical timeline. Politically, Roosevelt walks a careful line. Public speeches emphasize vigilance and support for the Allies, but he avoids language that could be interpreted as a declaration of war.
Congressional debates grow heated over the pace and scale of military expansion. Some lawmakers argue that the United States should remain strictly neutral, while others press for increased engagement to counter Axis influence in Asia and Europe. Each decision carries weight, knowing the timing of American entry could determine the course of the global conflict. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, intelligence networks observe the Pacific closely. Both German and Japanese analysts track U.S. ship movements and production rates, attempting to predict when, if ever, the Americans might enter the war. The interplay of preparation, caution, and strategic patience creates an unusual balance, the world's most powerful forces maneuvering in careful anticipation rather than reacting to immediate catastrophe. This calculated restraint sets the stage for a radically different trajectory in World War II, one defined not by sudden devastation, but by extended tension and deliberate strategy.
Japan's expanding empire without U.S. intervention. With Pearl Harbor untouched, Japan focuses on consolidating its dominance in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies become priority targets, but Japanese forces advance methodically, aiming to secure critical resources rather than provoke the United States prematurely. Oil fields, rubber plantations, and strategic ports fall under Japanese control, fueling an empire built not on sudden shock, but careful occupation and supply lines. Soldiers march through dense jungles, engineers construct airstrips in remote islands, and naval convoys shuttle supplies between newly captured territories. Japanese pilots practice reconnaissance missions and bombing drills, yet every movement is tempered by the knowledge that direct confrontation with the United States remains politically and strategically unwise. The absence of a Pearl Harbor attack allows Japan to expand efficiently, encountering resistance primarily from colonial forces rather than the American military. In Washington, U.S. intelligence becomes aware of Japan's territorial ambitions. Analysts monitor troop movements, shipping logs, and coded messages, attempting to predict the next step. Roosevelt pressures Congress to authorize increased military funding and bolster defensive capabilities in the Pacific. But without a direct attack, mobilization remains measured. The tension builds quietly. Every decision and countermove now carries enormous weight, as the absence of a single event reshapes the timeline of global warfare. Across the region, local populations experience the slow encroachment of Japanese rule. Cities are occupied, governments replaced, and infrastructure co-opted for military use. Yet, unlike the historical timeline, the absence of immediate U.S. retaliation gives Japan time to fortify these positions, creating a sprawling empire that grows in scope and strength while the world watches with apprehension. The calm before the storm stretches on, a precarious equilibrium where every strategic choice could tilt the balance of power irreversibly. Europe reacts to the shifting balance. In Berlin, Hitler and his generals take note of Japan's careful expansion. Without American intervention in the Pacific, Germany faces less immediate threat from across the Atlantic. Strategists convene in the Reich Chancellery to reconsider plans for further campaigns in Europe. Could more resources be diverted to the Eastern Front? Or would patience allow for a prolonged consolidation of conquered territories? The absence of the U.S. in the Pacific emboldens Hitler's planners, yet caution creeps into discussions, for every delay carries its own risks. Across occupied Europe, Allied governments in exile observe the Pacific developments with concern. The United Kingdom, struggling to maintain supply lines and colonial holdings, recognizes that American restraint may delay reinforcement.
Churchill, ever the strategist, pushes for more aggressive coordination with resistance networks and intelligence operations, hoping to capitalize on the slow-moving nature of Axis expansion in Asia, while simultaneously preparing for the inevitable arrival of American power. Meanwhile, in Washington, Roosevelt continues his delicate balancing act. Lend-Lease programs intensify, supplying the Allies with more materiel and equipment, yet the absence of direct attacks ensures the American public remains largely insulated from the immediacy of war. Debate simmers over how far the U.S. should go in supporting Britain and the Soviet Union, without crossing the threshold into open conflict. In this timeline, diplomacy and strategic patience dominate the corridors of power, shaping a world in which warfare is deferred, but the stakes remain immense. The altered balance of power sends ripples across continents. Axis forces gain confidence in their capacity to operate unchallenged in the Pacific, while European powers brace for the long-term consequences of delayed American involvement. A tense equilibrium emerges, one in which the largest industrial and military power in the world is poised on the edge of action, its ultimate choice determining whether the war remains regional or escalates into a global conflagration. The United States' growing military machine. As months pass, the United States quietly transforms itself into a formidable military force. Shipyards along the coasts churn out aircraft carriers, battleships, and submarines at a pace that would have seemed impossible in the early 1940s. Factories hum with activity, producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition, while civilians contribute to the war effort through voluntary programs and rationing. Without the immediate devastation of Pearl Harbor, production schedules remain orderly, and strategic planning benefits from the luxury of preparation without urgency. Training camps stretch across the country, filled with recruits who undergo rigorous drills and exercises. Naval aviators practice coordinated strikes. Submarine crews simulate patrols across vast stretches of ocean, and Army units rehearse amphibious landings and defensive maneuvers. The lack of a catastrophic attack allows officers to refine tactics, develop joint operations, and test equipment without the pressure of imminent combat. By 1942, the United States emerges as a disciplined and well-prepared military power, its forces ready for deployment with the advantage of foresight and experience that history never allowed. At the same time, Roosevelt navigates political hurdles to expand the Army, fund new research programs, and strengthen the intelligence apparatus. Scientists and engineers work on innovations like radar, improved aircraft engines, and cryptographic technologies, laying the foundation for the future conflict. While the public remains largely unaware, the machinery of war advances steadily, creating a strategic advantage that would be unattainable under the shock and chaos of a surprise attack. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders continue to watch these developments warily. Reports from spies and reconnaissance aircraft indicate that the United States is ramping up production and mobilizing forces, but there is no immediate evidence of an American strike. The delay in confrontation provides Japan with time to fortify defensive positions, stockpile resources, and plan further expansions, yet it also allows the Americans to prepare meticulously for the eventual war that looms on the horizon. Rising tensions across the Pacific. By 1942, the Pacific is a chessboard of tension and strategic positioning. Japanese forces, having secured territories in Southeast Asia and the Dutch East Indies, consolidate airfields, naval bases, and supply depots. Each island and coastline is fortified, anticipating future conflict, yet no shots are fired at American forces. Sailors and pilots carry out exercises and patrols with precision, aware that the United States is observing every movement, calculating when it might finally intervene. In Washington, military intelligence analyzes every intercepted Japanese transmission and ship movement. Analysts present detailed reports to President Roosevelt and his top generals, outlining potential scenarios: a delayed strike, a gradual expansion into the Pacific, or a sudden escalation if Japan senses weakness. Roosevelt convenes daily strategy sessions, weighing the political risks of mobilization against the necessity of maintaining American preparedness. Every decision, whether to increase naval presence in Hawaii, expand the Pacific Fleet, or continue diplomatic pressure, is made with the understanding that the timing of U.S. involvement could dramatically shape the global war. Back in Tokyo, tension is palpable despite the outward appearance of calm. Admirals and officers debate their next moves, aware that each occupied territory must be defended against potential future attacks. The absence of a Pearl Harbor strike means that Japan has avoided immediate American retaliation, but the longer the delay, the more time the United States has to strengthen and perfect its military capabilities. The commanders recognize that the window for a decisive advantage is narrow, and miscalculations could prove catastrophic in the long run. Across the Pacific Islands, local populations sense the subtle shifts in power. Trade routes are monitored, colonial authorities adjust to Japanese occupation, and whispers of impending conflict circulate among civilians and soldiers alike. The tension is quiet but omnipresent, a simmering storm that could erupt at any moment, changing the course of history in ways that no one yet fully comprehends.
By late 1942, it becomes clear that a direct confrontation between Japan and the United States is inevitable, even without the catalyst of Pearl Harbor. American planners, armed with months of preparation, consider multiple options for projecting power across the Pacific. Carrier task forces are assembled, submarines positioned along key shipping lanes, and amphibious assault teams trained for complex operations. The U.S. has gained a rare advantage: time. Unlike the historical timeline, this war will not begin in chaos, but as a deliberate, highly coordinated campaign. Japanese strategists, observing the Americans' growing capabilities, grow wary. The fleet in the Western Pacific now faces a more formidable opponent than in our historical timeline. Defensive strategies are revised, airfields reinforced, and supply chains secured. Every maneuver is calculated with extreme caution, knowing that an American strike, when it finally comes, will encounter a prepared and well-trained adversary rather than a fleet caught off guard. The absence of the Pearl Harbor attack also reshapes diplomacy. Neutral nations monitor the Pacific closely. Some colonial powers consider exploiting Japan's delayed confrontation to reclaim lost territories. Others, like the Soviet Union, watch cautiously, recognizing that the United States remains officially neutral but increasingly powerful. The global balance of power tilts in subtle ways, creating a prolonged prelude to war, where strategy, intelligence, and timing become far more critical than brute force alone. In American cities, ordinary citizens continue their lives with an underlying awareness that conflict may come. Propaganda campaigns, news reports, and political speeches cultivate vigilance, yet there is no mass panic. Families ration supplies, workers increase industrial output, and soldiers train rigorously, all preparing for a conflict whose scale is gradually becoming clear, but whose immediate trigger remains absent.
The first clash, an altered timeline. It isn't until mid-1943 that the first major clash occurs, though it differs dramatically from what history recorded. American carrier groups, fully trained and equipped, engaged Japanese forces near the Solomon Islands, striking with precision rather than desperation. Aircraft launch in coordinated waves, submarines ambush supply convoys, and amphibious units seize lightly defended islands, gradually pushing Japanese forces back. The difference is stark. Every maneuver is calculated, every attack supported by intelligence gathered over months of preparation. Japanese commanders are caught off balance, not by surprise, but by the scale and efficiency of the American operation. Losses mount, and the illusion of invulnerability begins to fade.
Unlike the chaotic aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Japan now faces a methodical and relentless opponent. The absence of the initial shock attack means that Japan cannot rely on momentum or surprise. Every battle is fought against a fully alert, fully prepared adversary. Across the Pacific, sailors and airmen from both sides experience a war defined by precision and planning rather than sheer panic and destruction. Civilian populations witness occupation and liberation in slow succession, and news of battles spread through radio and dispatches rather than instant shockwaves. Meanwhile, Roosevelt and his generals coordinate campaigns with the Allies, combining intelligence from Europe and Asia to apply pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. This first engagement sets the tone for a very different Pacific War, one where preparation, timing, and resource management outweigh the chaotic ferocity of surprise. The conflict remains deadly and complex, but the absence of Pearl Harbor has fundamentally altered its character. No fiery devastation, no instant outrage, only a prolonged strategic contest where the ultimate outcome hangs in a delicate balance.
Global implications of the delayed conflict. As the Pacific War unfolds, the ripple effects are felt across the globe. In Europe, Hitler grows increasingly frustrated with the delayed American entry. Without the sudden threat from the Pacific, the United States focuses its industrial power on supporting Britain and the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, accelerating the flow of tanks, aircraft, and munitions to key fronts. The Germans notice the shift in logistics and realize that even without direct confrontation with the U.S., the industrial might of America is now being funneled efficiently to their enemies. In London, Churchill observes this altered dynamic with cautious optimism. British forces can hold strategic positions longer, reinforced by American equipment arriving steadily rather than in a sudden reactive surge. Morale improves across the Atlantic, and long-term planning becomes more coherent. In contrast to the historical timeline, Britain faces fewer immediate crises in the early years of American involvement, allowing commanders to focus on carefully orchestrated offensives rather than desperate defensive maneuvers. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japanese expansion begins to stall under sustained but precise American attacks. Occupied territories, once seemingly secure, now experience targeted strikes that disrupt supply lines and weaken fortifications. Civilians in these regions face the slow grind of war rather than sudden catastrophe, and local resistance movements gain time to organize and support Allied efforts. The absence of Pearl Harbor has transformed the Pacific theater into a war of strategy, attrition, and preparation, where the timing of each engagement is as decisive as the battle itself. Politically, Roosevelt uses the delay to strengthen alliances, rally international support, and position the United States as the central force capable of shaping the post-war world. Diplomats negotiate quietly, while generals and admirals prepare for coordinated assaults that will eventually tilt the balance. The delayed confrontation ensures that the ultimate war effort is more deliberate, more strategic, and arguably more sustainable than the rapid escalation that defined history.
The war's long-term consequences. By 1944, the consequences of Japan's restraint are fully apparent. The United States has emerged as a highly efficient war machine, its forces trained, coordinated, and equipped with advanced technology. Battles across the Pacific are no longer chaotic. They are calculated campaigns that steadily erode Japanese control while minimizing unnecessary American losses. The psychological impact on Japanese commanders is significant. They face a capable adversary rather than a shocked and disoriented enemy, forcing them to reconsider offensive strategies and defensive priorities simultaneously. In Europe, the delayed American entry into direct combat allowed for a more sustained flow of aid to Allied forces. The Soviet Union continues to bear the brunt of the German advance on the Eastern Front, but with Lend-Lease support, tanks, aircraft, and supplies bolster their resistance. German forces, initially emboldened by the United States' absence, begin to encounter strategic difficulties as Allied pressure increases on multiple fronts.
The interconnected nature of global conflict becomes clearer. Every decision in the Pacific influences outcomes in Europe, and vice versa. Diplomatically, the delayed confrontation has allowed neutral countries to navigate cautiously, assessing the strength of each side before committing to alliances or occupation. Nations in South America, Africa, and Asia adjust trade policies and military postures based on the evolving balance of power, contributing to a more measured global tension rather than sudden upheaval. Economically, the United States benefits from preparation time, mobilizing industry efficiently, and avoiding the shock-driven disruptions that historically followed Pearl Harbor. By the end of 1944, it is evident that Japan's decision to refrain from attacking Pearl Harbor has reshaped the trajectory of World War II. The war becomes a conflict defined by preparation, strategy, and timing, with both sides maneuvering carefully rather than reacting to instantaneous catastrophe. The absence of a single decisive strike delays the eruption of full-scale hostilities, transforming the global struggle into a protracted contest of skill, patience, and calculated risk.
Reflections on a world without Pearl Harbor. As 1945 approaches, historians in this alternate timeline would look back and note the profound impact of Japan's restraint. The absence of Pearl Harbor delayed the United States' direct engagement, but it also created a military force that was better trained, better equipped, and more strategically coordinated than in the historical timeline. Every battle in the Pacific became a test of planning and precision rather than a reaction to devastation, fundamentally altering the character of the war. For civilians in the United States, the war feels different. Families watch newsreels of distant conflicts rather than experience sudden national trauma. Recruitment and rationing are steady rather than panic-driven. Soldiers returning from initial skirmishes are experienced but not scarred by the immediate chaos of a surprise attack. Across the Pacific, populations under Japanese occupation endure a slow, methodical military presence, experiencing war as a drawn-out strategic conflict rather than sudden destruction. Global leaders recognize the new dynamics of power. Roosevelt's careful balancing of diplomacy, aid, and preparation has positioned the United States as a dominant global force before it even enters full-scale war. Axis powers, while still aggressive, face a capable, organized adversary at the moment of confrontation, leading to battles that are intense but measured. The absence of Pearl Harbor becomes a defining what-if in history, illustrating how a single event, or the lack of it, can reshape the trajectory of nations, the timing of battles, and the experience of war itself. In this world, the lesson is clear. Restraint, timing, and preparation can be as decisive as any attack. The war still rages, still demands sacrifice, but it unfolds differently, with outcomes shaped by strategy rather than shock. Japan's choice to withhold its strike left an indelible mark on the course of World War II, forever changing the map, the battles, and the very nature of global conflict.
The post-war world reimagined. With the war drawing to a close, the global landscape in this alternate timeline looks markedly different. The United States enters the conflict with a fully trained and highly coordinated military, having avoided the catastrophic losses that historically followed Pearl Harbor. Its industrial and logistical advantages, combined with the extended period of preparation, allow it to project power decisively across both the Pacific and European theaters. The final battles against Japan and Germany are therefore fought under conditions of careful planning rather than frantic reaction, reducing some of the chaos and unpredictability that characterized the historical end of the war. In Asia, Japanese forces, though initially expansive, are gradually pushed back by well-prepared American and Allied operations. Key territories in the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and island chains across the Pacific are liberated with fewer casualties on the American side, though local populations still endure hardship and the disruption of occupation. The protracted timeline allows Allied forces to coordinate land, sea, and air operations more effectively, creating a war that is methodical yet relentless in its progress toward victory. Europe, too, sees subtle differences. The delayed American involvement allows for more strategic reinforcement of Britain and the Soviet Union, giving the Allies a broader, more coordinated approach to liberating occupied territories. Germany's war machine, initially emboldened by the absence of immediate U.S. engagement, faces increasingly organized counterattacks, and the collapse of the Axis occurs with less surprise, but more overwhelming force. Diplomatically, neutral nations are able to better assess the shifting balance of power, positioning themselves in ways that influence post-war treaties, reconstruction, and emerging spheres of influence. In this reimagined history, the war's human and political consequences are no less profound, but the trajectory of conflict and the timing of decisive events has been forever altered.
Looking back, historians and strategists in this alternate timeline draw stark lessons from Japan's decision not to attack Pearl Harbor. One decisive choice, the restraint of a single military strike, has cascading effects that alter the course of global events. Military planners note that preparation, timing, and strategic patience can rival even the most audacious offensive operations in their impact on the outcome of war. The United States' ability to enter the conflict as a fully ready, coordinated, and well-equipped power becomes a defining factor in its eventual victory, illustrating how forethought and organization can shape history as much as valor and firepower. Politically, the delay in confrontation demonstrates the delicate balance between provocation and restraint. Roosevelt's administration shows that careful diplomacy, coupled with strategic support for allies, can prepare a nation for war without forcing it into immediate conflict. Axis powers, by contrast, learn that overconfidence and reliance on the element of surprise can be countered when an opponent has time to prepare and adapt. The world witnesses how a single avoided disaster can create opportunities for both reflection and advantage, fundamentally shifting the human and geopolitical landscape. Civilians in both the United States and occupied regions of the Pacific experience war differently. While still marked by hardship and loss, the conflict unfolds with less sudden devastation and greater predictability. Populations endure the pressures of rationing, occupation, and combat, but the lessons of strategic patience allow militaries and governments to mitigate some of the chaos that historically accompanied surprise attacks. The war becomes not just a test of weapons and manpower, but of planning, foresight, and the long-term consequences of decisions that could have easily gone the other way. Ultimately, this alternate history underscores the profound influence of timing and restraint in warfare. Japan's choice to hold back reshaped the trajectory of World War II, transforming battles, alliances, and outcomes in ways that history textbooks can only speculate about. The absence of Pearl Harbor serves as a reminder that wars are not only fought with guns and bombs, but also with the choices leaders make when deciding whether or when to strike.
The final reflections. As the war finally winds down, the world stands in a state of cautious relief. The United States, having entered the conflict on its own carefully chosen timeline, emerges not only victorious, but strategically strengthened, with lessons in preparation and coordination that will shape military doctrine for decades. Japan, having delayed its most audacious strike, suffers a gradual but inevitable retreat, its empire contracting under sustained Allied pressure. The absence of Pearl Harbor has meant fewer immediate casualties for Americans and a prolonged but more calculated struggle in the Pacific, fundamentally reshaping the narrative of heroism, sacrifice, and strategy. In Europe, the delayed but inevitable American involvement similarly influences the final campaigns. Germany faces a more measured and coordinated counterattack, and while the devastation of war remains immense, the timing of interventions allows for slightly less chaotic logistics and improved Allied coordination. The strategic patience cultivated in this timeline underscores a lesson repeated across theaters of war, that timing and preparation can dictate the shape and consequences of global conflict as much as battlefield valor. Historians in this alternate reality would reflect on how a single decision, Japan's choice to refrain from attacking Pearl Harbor, altered the trajectory of nations. Battles were fought differently, supply lines managed more efficiently, and civilians experienced war in a subtly transformed way. The interconnected consequences ripple across decades, influencing post-war reconstruction, geopolitical alignments, and the evolution of military strategy. This scenario serves as a compelling reminder of the fragility of historical events and the immense power of choices that never actually occur. In the end, the world learns that wars are not only defined by the battles fought, but also by the moments deliberately avoided, the attacks restrained, and the patience exercised by leaders who understand that timing can be as lethal as any weapon. In this history without Pearl Harbor, the stage is set for a new global order, born not of sudden destruction, but of deliberate strategy, foresight, and the quiet power of restraint.